On a cold December night in 1945, a devastating house fire in the quiet town of Verville, West Virginia, left 5 children missing, leaving behind a tragic mystery that would go unsolved for decades. George and Jenny were Italian immigrants who had made a life for themselves and their 10 children in the coal country of West Virginia. Jenny had a loving home. As World War II ended and the holidays approached, the ladies, known for their hard work and devotion to their families, prepared to celebrate Christmas in their charming 2-story home. But little did they know that their world would be shattered by an event that would change their lives forever. On the night of December 24th, 1945, the Sodder family went to bed eagerly awaiting a beautiful Christmas morning. But around 1 a.m., Jenny Sodder was awakened by an unknown phone call from a woman she did not recognize, laughing into the phone. Jenny did not know she took it as a joke or a wrong number and did not dwell on it. She quickly returned to bed, this time waking up to the sound of something hitting the roof. There was a loud bang followed by rolling sounds, and it didn't take long for her to wake up. Jenny realized the house was on fire, and her 4 children, Sylvia Marin, George Jr., and John, managed to escape. But the other 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Lewis, Jenny, and Betty, ages 5 to 14, were still inside. George desperately tried to re-enter the burning house, but the doors were locked, and the windows were covered in thick walls of flames, and the temperature was rising. In the midst of the chaos, one family discovered that the ladder they normally leaned against the side of the house had mysteriously disappeared. George even tried to drive the truck up to the house and climb onto the roof, but despite being in perfect working order, neither vehicle would start, and the helpless family had to watch in horror as their house burned down, seemingly taking the lives of their 5 beloved children. As the sun rose on Christmas morning, the devastated Sodder family examined the smoldering remains of their home. The fire was delayed, and local fire departments arrived to conduct an initial investigation. But a tragic accidental death soon followed. Firefighters' human remains in the ashes became an inexplicable mystery. Fire Chief F.J. Morris claimed that the fire burned too hot, too fast, and left no remains. Despite this unlikely theory, the fire was believed to be an accident caused by faulty wiring, and the case was closed. However, the welders rejected this explanation and repeatedly found bones, only to see that they would have burned to ashes under similar conditions. During the worst of the fire, the missing ladder was eventually discovered in a nearby wooded area, and the house's telephone lines were cut rather than burned. All of this was confusing and deepened the mystery surrounding the fate of the welders' children, only fueled by their love for their missing child and their growing suspicion of him. The fall play George and Jenny Weld begin a relentless search for answers, hiring private investigators, consulting psychics, and even enlisting the help of the FBI, but their efforts are met with resistance from local authorities who claim the fire was a tragic accident. George also receives threats from a disgruntled former employee who was fired for shoplifting. Over the years, the ladies receive provocative tips and videos of children being served breakfast shortly after the fire, as well as a letter from a St. Louis woman who said she had seen the missing soldiers still alive in 1968. More than 2 decades after the fire, the soldiers received an anonymous envelope containing a photograph of a man in his 20s with a coded message on the back that bore a striking resemblance to their son Louis Les Sold. "I love my brother Frankie. 91,132 or 35 little boys." Despite all their efforts, the photographs or the work of the men in the picture could not be verified. In a strange incident, George came across a magazine in New York City featuring a group of young ballet victims, and among them was a girl who looked very much like his missing daughter, Betty. George, forced by his father's arrangement, went to the Democratic school, but was persistently refused, and the federal government rejected the offer. Unfortunately, the police and fire departments rejected the offer in August 1949. George managed to convince the famous pathologist Oscar Hunter to oversee the excavation of the site of their old home. After an extensive search, a number of artifacts were uncovered, including a children's dictionary, some coins, and a few small pieces of human disease. Marshall T. Newman, an expert at the Smithsonian Institution, identified the piece as a single person's lumbar vertebra. Analysis by Newman showed that the bones belonged to someone between 16 and 22 years old at the time of death. Therefore, it was unlikely that they belonged to the missing children of soldiers. There were also no signs of fire exposure on the bone fragments, so it seemed odd. All that remained were these fragments. The report determined that the vertebrae were most likely from dirt that George had used to clear the property with a bulldozer. Despite these revelations, the West Virginia legislature held 2 hearings on the case in 1950. Governor Okie L. Patterson and State Police Inspector Wee Burritt later declared the troopers' case hopeless and officially closed at the state level. The FBI was considered to have jurisdiction over the case due to the possibility of interstate abduction, but was forced to drop the case after years of fruitless leads. Another theory is that the children may have been abducted to participate in a secret experiment, as George had little concrete criticism of the French regime. The case continues to fascinate and speculate professionals and amateur detectives alike. The tireless search for the Sodder family's missing children continued until George's death in 1969 and Jenny's in 1989. As we delve into the shadows of this horrific case, it's a reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of a family's love that shines through. A continuation of a family struggling for years. The riddle of the Sodder children's disappearance is a moving testament to the power of hope in the face of unimaginable loss. The Sodder children's disappearance is a tragedy that vividly illustrates the deepest fears and despair of the human heart. A house may be reduced to ashes, but a mother and father's hope is stronger than the flames that consume their home, leaving a dark future behind. That night, George and Jenny Sodder didn't just lose their child. They lost their certainty, and instead they were left alone with the vast, endless void of unanswered questions. The weight of not knowing whether their child was suffering, whether they were afraid, whether he was still alive somewhere, was heavier than grief itself, and so their lives became an endless search, an unhappy longing for truth. The arrival of a frightening photograph years later was not closure, but a cruel whisper of possibility that kept their pain alive like embers that never really went out. For the Sodder family, time has not healed the wounds. It has only deepened the mystery. Every holiday, every birthday, every quiet moment in their home is a torture filled with the absence of 5 children whose fates remain unknown. Had they been abducted somewhere in the dark of night, or had the fire erased all trace of their existence, leaving even their bones unfindable? Theories emerged, whispers of conspiracies spread, but no answers ever came to light for them. Hope and despair intertwined in a never-ending cycle, fueling their relentless search. The photograph, the mysterious letter, the sightings, the inconclusive reports, each clue was both a promise and a torment, keeping them in a painful limbo between reality and illusion.